Hello, welcome. All right, before we get started, I wanted to say we're going to be recording this. So, only the reading part. Is that okay with everyone? So, just so you know, if you see this little cute mic here, Brian's going to be recording the readings, okay? See how that works, all right? Good? But we won't be recording the sharing part. How many people are here that have never been here to this meeting before? Yay! Just a brief overview of what this meeting is. It's a little different from any other big book meeting, okay? And it started out of my own self-will run riot. Because I go to meetings and go, gosh, if I ran a big book meeting. Look, they're playing our song. I'd get a big book and I would go, wow, that's awfully big. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to go to meetings and then hear what they say and then repeat what they say. But when I started going through the book, I realized, real interesting. The book isn't that big, although all of it's important. These are stories. This is our program, the first 164 pages of the big book, okay? These are stories, very important, but they change with each edition. We've had 4 different editions of the big book. In each edition, the stories change, okay? If you have this book, Experience, Strength, and Hope, which is all the stories out of the first, second, and third edition, and the 4th edition, you have everything ever written in the big book. Pretty cool. So, we're going to be working out of the 4th edition. Does anybody need a big book? Good idea to have a big book in a big book meeting. We have some up here that you guys can borrow. Feel free to come take them. Now, instead of the reading in the beginning, chapter 5 or chapter 3, we do an overview of the big book. So everyone knows exactly why we're reading, what we're reading tonight, and how it fits into the first 164. During the reading, unlike other meetings where you have different people read, there's only one person that reads. That would be me. But during the reading, we welcome crosstalk. So if you have a question or if you want to shout out, what's Armistice Day? Just shout it out, okay? Somebody else, we've had a lot of people here with a lot of knowledge about the program and the book that have a lot of time and experience, and we all kind of bounce stuff off each other, okay? If there's a question or a suggestion or something that's not understood. During the reading, it is not the time for checking in and sharing about your cat for 10 minutes. But shout out questions or things like that, because after the reading, we will have a half an hour from that point for sharing. And that's when you can share on what we read and anything else. Any questions? Good. Ready to get started? All right, so tonight we're going to be starting at the beginning, hence my shirt. The big book does not need to be rewritten, just reread. Now, this is our big book, right? In the first 164 outlined in the contents page, okay? In the very beginning of the book. That's what you see up here, okay? So out of the 164, let's pretend we're way back in 1937-38, and we want to go out and help alcoholics. Us in the room are the only ones sober in Ohio, New York, and Detroit, right? We're the only ones. And we want to get together so we can help more alcoholics. So we want to go into hospitals, have missionaries, and put out some literature, right? One of the things that did come about is we put out the book. Now, we're trying to get together and figure out how we're going to do this book, right? So the first thing we do, in the preface, we talk about the 164 pages. One of the first things we say is that we don't change the 164 pages. Strong sentiment against any change being made to the first 164 pages. And on the very bottom of the preface, at least in this edition, it says, our hope is that if you haven't yet found an answer, and when you read this, or the stories, you might say, I felt like that. Oh my gosh, I might be an alcoholic. I think this might work for me. In other words, me too, right? Then we overview the forewords. 1939 tells us first, this is precisely how we have recovered. So there's clear-cut directions in the big book. Unlike some of the suggestions and things you hear in a meeting, there are clear-cut directions in the big book. The second edition, we throw in some history. Then the third and the fourth talks about how we've grown, okay? That's what we're going to be reading tonight. We're starting right there. Now, the book starts at the doctor's opinion. So let's say we all got together and we were like, well, where do we start? Now, if I have a toothache, right? Am I going to go to my hairdresser and go, is this a cavity? No. Most likely I'm going to, I'm going to go to the doctor, the dentist that specializes in teeth, right? So we go to the doctor, Dr. Silkworth. This isn't Dr. Bob. Our two founders, Bill and Bob. Dr. Bob is not the one that wrote Doctor's Opinion. It's Dr. Silkworth. Let's say we went down to the detox or to Harbor General and we walked in and the one doctor that's always seen us there looks up and goes, you again. Sorry, we don't have a pill that'll fix you. You have this allergy. No matter how much doctoring we do, we don't seem to have anything that'll fix you. No synthetic knowledge, no pill that will fix this allergy. You're irritable, restless, and discontent. But whatever these people have to say seems to work with you guys because they have a message of depth and weight. Okay? That's the good doctor's introduction to us, and he talks about the allergy. He also says only a spiritual solution is going to work. Then Bill tells his story, just like in a speaker meeting. He talks about crossing that line, drinking again, trying to stop, drinking again, then depression, stealing from his wife's purse, the message being carried to him and the importance of carrying it to another. The next chapter, and there is a solution. All of us chime in and we go, a lot of us were just like Bill. Don't worry. If you're Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you might be one of us. We got a solution, just come along for the ride. More about alcoholism, kind of like in a participation meeting, right? We have Jim the car salesman, Fred the accountant, and a lot of us each tell little bits of our story. And in there, maybe you didn't relate so far, but you might go, oh, that's me. Now, we've talked about spirituality a lot up till this point. We have a whole chapter right here that's dedicated to don't overthink the God thing. We agnostics is pretty much, you lack that power to be able to do this by yourself, right? Come along for the ride. If you got a God, good. If you don't worry about it. But you just have to be willing to understand that you lack that power by yourself and there's a power bigger than you that's going to be able to help you get sober, right? Come on. Don't overthink the God thing. And then we start the steps in chapter 5. Now, that's going to go over step 3, where we talk about us as alcoholics, self-will run riot, and how to do an inventory. Resentments, fear, sex, and we learn a few facts about ourselves. In 6, we get a sponsor. We learn how to tell that story, so we learn these facts about ourselves and character defects and how to make amends, how to continually look at ourselves and keep ourselves spiritually fit, and the importance of prayer and meditation. 7 is all about sponsorship and how we introduce ourselves to the new person. We don't criticize. We don't talk down to them. We offer and see what we can help. They're under no obligation to us, right? Now, just because we're sober and we've done the steps and maybe we're starting to help people, that does not mean we're not still a little nuts with family and wives and people at home, right? So we've got a chapter to the wives is going to explain some of the different categories of alcoholism as well as introduction to Al-Anon. The family afterwards, how we deal with family at home, and employers. If you got a drunk one of us, give them a book, send them to a meeting. If you got a drunk one of us coming back, these are some of the things you might encounter. And a vision for you, Bill sums it all up, just like the whole 164, and says, we read it in a meeting, right? It's the last page of the 164, and we're pretty much, if all of us in the room only had like 2, 3, 4 years sober when we wrote this book, it starts off, we realize we know only little, right? We're basically going, here's our book, hope you don't die. Hope we can help, right? The first story is always Dr. Bob's Nightmare. That's our second founder. So our 2 founders are going to be Bill and Bob, right? In how it works, when we read it in a meeting, you guys ever read it in a meeting? This blew me away too. But where it says, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostics, our personal adventures before and after make clear these 3 pertinent ideas. A, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. B, I haven't been able to stop on my own. C, something bigger than me is going to have to work, right? Those are the premises of steps 1 and 2. Something bigger than me is going to return me to sanity. Being convinced of these, you're now at 3. So we find steps 1 and 2 up to this part, up to chapter 5. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. How cool is that? So what we're reading tonight is the preface and the forewords. We're going to get a little bit of history and a little bit of knowledge about AA and how we came about. Any questions? Remember, feel free to shout out any kind of questions if you guys don't know or have a question on what we're reading, okay? Or if there's a word I mispronounce. Kelly usually corrects me. Everybody have a book? All right, we're at the preface. This is the 4th edition of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in 1939. And in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. That gives me goosebumps in a way. In just 16 years, that's how many people were struggling to have this. Now, in the third edition, which came off the presses in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19,550,000 in all formats. The next paragraph, we're going to talk about that first edition, okay? Because this book has become our basic text, we don't just read it at home, read it once, go, yeah, I read that. We study it, we read it with others, right? It has become the basic text for our society and has helped such a large number of alcoholic men and women to recovery. There exists a strong sentiment against any radical change being made to it. Therefore, the first portion, the first 164 pages of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called The Doctor's Opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. That's the doctor's opinion, right? Now, the second edition, the second printing of the first edition added the appendix, The Spiritual Experience. The second edition in the appendices on the AA traditions, the medical point of view, the religious view, and AA, the Lasker Award, and information on how to contact AA were added. Now, the traditions came about somewhat throughout all of this. We were coming up with some of the traditions, right? But they weren't ratified until our first conference, which was between the first and second edition. So they weren't included until the second edition. It doesn't mean that we didn't come out with the traditions until 16 years later. It just means they weren't put in the book until the second edition. Okay? How to contact AA were added, and the appendix on Alcoholic Foundation was discontinued. But the chief change was made in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect AA's fellowship growth, Bill's story, the doctor's opinion, or the doctor's nightmare, and some other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of the 2 stories were rewritten with new titles, 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. I think we brought that up last week, those of you that weren't here. We have 1 section, 2 sections, and 3 sections. If you wonder what they are, the first section will pretty much have a lot of our original founders or some of our older members, right? The stories from some of our more original members. The second one is They Stopped in Time, where maybe somebody had a higher bottom, and the ones in the third section are the ones that had the I just about died in Las Vegas, leaving Las Vegas, right? So those are kind of how those sections are broken apart. So now we go to the third section, the third edition, 1976. In the third edition, part 1, The Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the second edition. 8 new stories were added, and part 3, They Nearly Lost It All. 8 stories were retained, and 5 new ones were added. We're kind of going over the changes, right? You're getting that. Now, the fourth edition included the 12 concepts. Anybody ever hear the 12, 12, and 12? We hear the 12 and 12 because we have them on the wall, but the 12 concepts of service are going to include things like GSA and how we keep AA as a whole together, right? 4 world service and revises the 3 sections to personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been added or deleted. 6 of the stories from part 2 have been carried over, 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to part 1. Nobody's confused at all yet, right? Good. Now to sum up our preface, all the changes made over the years in the Big Book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume. Anybody know why we call it the Big Book? The book is called Alcoholics Anonymous. We call it the Big Book. We wrote it on big paper. It was cheaper for us to write that after the war and stuff. So, in the years, all the changes being made to the Big Book, which is our fond nickname for it, have had the same purpose. And what is that? To represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous. more accurately and thereby to reach more alcoholics. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe that this program can work for me too. Me too! I can't do steps 1 and 2 if I'm not going, me too! All right, forward to the first edition, 1939. This is the forward as it appeared in the first edition, printing of the first edition in 1939. We, of Alcoholics Anonymous, are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Anybody know why we have men and women in there? One of the original names that we were thinking of for the book was 100 Men. Florence Rankin, who wrote A Feminine Victory, had 1 year sober. And her story is in the first edition, but it's not in the other editions because she passed away in 1939, right? But while we were trying to think of a name and we were going to come up with 100 Men, she was like, excuse me, hello, you're going to have to call it 100 Men and 1 woman. But she wasn't the only woman that was in our early days either. We have Sylvia and we had Marty Mann. And then Lil, who was trying to gobble up all Dr. Bob's pills and was chased around his doctor's office and then dove out a window when we were trying to get her sober. It's kind of one of the reasons Dr. Bob went, we cannot work with these women. But he was still, don't get me wrong, willing to help anybody that wanted and needed recovery. Sylvia, who wrote Keys to the Kingdom, would have been the first woman with long-term sobriety. But Marty Mann's usually given that title. Yeah, kind of cool. Men and women. So, what is the main purpose of our book? To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So we have clear-cut directions in here. Right, it's italicized. It would cost more to make things italicized in those days, so usually if it's italicized or squiggly, it's important. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. We're saying that we hope that this book is enough for you, that we don't have to keep proving ourselves that we have an answer. I believe that when we put it out at the time, we weren't sure what direction or how many people would benefit, but we've got to the wives, which we didn't have Al-Anon at the time. We have to the employers, because employers thought alcoholics not a problem. They just have a lack of willpower. So there were other people that would be picking up this book that probably would benefit from it. We're going to talk about some anonymity now. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few. Can you imagine if just all of us in this room had to field all the calls from every alcoholic trying to get sober in the whole United States right now?
Well, there were less phones.
Well, there were less phones, yes. But I'm just saying. All right. It is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at the present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not very well carry on our occupation in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. When writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designate himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So my name is Kelly Corbin. I have no problem putting it out there, right? Neither did Dr. Bob. He thought it was a little odd that if somebody was searching for recovery and just showed up, you know, in Ohio and was like, anybody know Dr. Bob? I need some help. Well, do you have his last name? Well, he's a doctor. His name's Bob. Kind of one of the reasons we have home groups. People can find us if they're looking for an answer. Maybe the seed was planted a year or 2 years ago, but somebody comes back and goes, I was looking for that person that really helped me once, okay? But it's a personal choice, okay? Because it is an avocation and we don't, anonymity is important. So we very earnestly ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. Now we're talking about the traditions, right? So we did have an idea of them when we wrote the first book. There are no dues or fees whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful in such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. Alcoholics Anonymous. So that was 1939. I read something at one point that there are some that when we wrote they're constitutionally incapable, and when the doctor, in the doctor's opinion, talks about psychopaths. And so there were some people, in the wards that we ended up in, there were people with very serious conditions that were not just alcoholism. And they were trying to relate with those. Those were incapable of being honest. Those were psychopaths, or the ones that are incapable of getting this. They're not just alcoholics, but without saying that, you know, we're a certain class. It talks about that and how we talk to others. They're under no obligation to us. You know what I mean? I'm not going to tell them they're an alcoholic, nor am I going to, you know, force it down their throat. What I do is pretty much just say, hey, this is how I drank. We have a way that, you know, is a way out, is an answer, is a solution, and my life's gotten a lot better. If you'd like to know more, I'm here. And if that person wants to, or they go out and drink, or they come back again and they try and talk to somebody else, we just offer our story, and if they share a little bit about themselves and then eventually come by, they will. But to waste too much time on the one person doesn't mean that we kick them out, but to waste too much time on one person trying to convince them means that we could lose our opportunity to be helpful to the person that's coming right along next to them. Also, this was a thing for debate once, was whether we can say our name and anonymity. When it says, when writing or speaking publicly, right? So in the newspaper, somebody picks up the newspaper and they read the front and they go, oh, Alan says, oh, he's a member of and starts saying that this is what alcoholics, and talking for AA. We can't do that. But if someone's asked Alan to come speak, he can very well choose to use his last name or not, but also say, I'm here to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, or I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. See, he's identifying himself as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but has been invited somewhere to speak or to talk, but not to go out and be on a commercial, so when somebody turns on their TV, they get it without asking for it or looking for it or searching for it. 16 years have passed. Now we're going to put out our second book, and we kind of go, hey, we should throw in some history and tell people how we started, right? That's what we're going to do. So now we go 16 years, and the foreword to the second edition, when we put out our second edition in 1955, is, figures given in this foreword describe the fellowship as it was in 1955. Since the original foreword to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope, remember we talked about our hope, that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already continues in the early text, 2s, 3s, and 5s of us have sprung up in other communities. 16 years have elapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and the province of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in more than 50 foreign countries in the U.S. possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. An augury, or the beginning mix of what's about to come. The cake mix, maybe you could say, okay? It could be the promise. Hello, my name is Kelly. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And somebody gets, huh. Hi, my name's Kelly. I'm a recovering alcoholic. Or hi, my name's Kelly. I'm an alcoholic. right? Let's look at the very first page, but we'll go back to the second edition here. But the very first page says what? This is a story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. There's references on my page. I can give them to you later. But once we've done the steps, we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We have recovered. As long as we then stay spiritually fit by continually doing these steps, working with others, right? I have a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of my spiritual condition, right? So I have that daily reprieve of being recovered, almost like somebody that's in remission, right? I have the option to say I have recovered. In other words, I've done the steps, right? Or one day, next week, I can come in and go, I'm just an alcoholic, I'm stressed, and I don't feel recovered. It doesn't matter. It's a personal choice, but it does not say that we can't say it. Because at the time, there were different cures. Just to make it real quick so we're not getting too off base, but Towns Hospital believed they had a cure. There was a lot of odd premonitions or ideas at that time, but they believed that they had the belladonna treatment and all those other things. But he also, sauerkraut, but they were just trying to say, we have a way to help when he went in there. He wasn't saying, my goodness, this might be a subject of controversy when we put out our book in 80 years. He wasn't saying that I have a stand-all cure. He's saying, we have something, we might be able to help this guy. So now we're in the second edition, right? We're in a whole bunch of countries. The spark that started it all. The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was stuck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935. During a talk between a New York stockbroker, Bill, and an Akron physician, Dr. Bob. 6 months earlier, December 34, Bill, the broker, had been relieved of his drink obsession with a sudden spiritual experience. Real quick, does anybody know when AA's birthday is? June 10th, 1935, the same as Dr. Bob's. Do you think we picked that date because we like Dr. Bob better? No, it's not because we like Dr. Bob better. It's because two were together. So we have AA's birthday at the same time that the first two were together. Following a meeting with an alcoholic friend, that would be Ebby Thatcher, from his friend who is now part of the Oxford group, who had been in contact with the Oxford group of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William Silkworth, who wrote The Doctor's Opinion, a New York specialist in alcoholism who now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned of the grave nature of alcoholism. Though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group, or in other words, the beliefs of the Oxford group, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personal defects, a restitution to those harmed when we make amends, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in dependence upon God. Now, the Oxford group, FYI, was not a AA program, let's say, okay? It was pretty much, it turned out to be called the Calvary Church later, but had a vision that we could change the world if all the single moms, you talk to all the single moms about being a single mom, and then we'll change the world. And you're a politician. You're going to go talk to all the politicians. Bill, you're a drunk. You're going to talk to all the drunks. But we got to get to change, you know what I mean? Or Bill, they wanted Bill to basically talk to businessmen, but he wanted to go help drunks. And there were some other things that they did where they also didn't want us continually meeting in there because we didn't belong to that church. But it was a start for us. And it's also the serendipity of how things all come together. Beautifully, the message was carried to Bill through the Oxford group from his friend. He never claims to have come up with this all by himself. But there's a lot of neat references from all over the place. Even from, there's some good stuff we got from the Washingtonians. You know, so there's a lot of things we got from a lot of people that have tried to get us to not die. This kind of was just a magical mixture, okay? So now, how many people have seen the movie where Bill goes and he's pacing at the hotel, you know what I mean? And he's ready to, at the hotel in the telephone booth, and he picks it up, right? We've all seen that movie. Some have, some haven't. If you haven't, this is the scene. So now, prior to his journey, the broker, Bill, had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help another alcoholic, but he had succeeded in only keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business trip. The serendipity here, which is really cool, is that prior to this, in those 6 months, Bill had a spiritual experience, right? So he was going around. When he first heard that Bill came from the Oxford group, like at church, he's like, oh my God, now crackpot about God. He was not hearing it. Most of us do come in when we've got a predisposition for religious beliefs or church, or we've had different experiences, and we're like, oh no. So Bill was out there going, you need God, you're going to get better. And it wasn't working. He wasn't able to get anybody sober. And it was Dr. Silkworth that came up to him and said, that's not what you heard first. You first heard about the allergy. Start talking about the allergy and what alcoholism is, okay? And then he went to Akron on this business trip. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. He was at the hotel lobby now. He suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry this message to another alcoholic. So he made the phone call, got a hold of Tunks, who called, or the Oxford group, who called Henrietta. Henrietta happened to know Dr. Bob and his wife, and this was the day before Mother's Day. But we'll get more into that with Dr. Bob's story. That person that he talked with was Henrietta Seiberling, who introduced Bill and Bob. So that alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, Dr. Bob. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with all the willingness he had never been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. This seems to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, is vital to permanent recovery. So now we got Bill and Bob together, right? Look at, there's the picture up on the wall. See the man on the bed with the two men sitting next to him? That's the story where he calls up the hospital, and we got a real corker, and we've got Bill Dotson next. Okay, Bill Dotson, you'll hear about him in the Vision, in A Vision for You. We've got a real corker. Dr. Bob only had 16 days sober, and he managed to help change the life of another man. So you don't have to have a 30-day chip to reach your hand out to a newcomer. Just saying. So hence now, these two men work almost frantically among alcoholics arriving at the ward in Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. That was Bill Dotson. His story follows Dr. Bob's now, and it's called AA number 3, okay? Yes, he was not the very first case. First case was Eddie. Didn't work out so well. Eddie ended up having a year sober eventually by 1950, but back in 1935, the first one that managed to get it was AA number 3, which was Bill Dotson. Bill Dotson, he never had another drink. This work in Akron, he's still in Ohio, continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success when the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935. The first AA group had actually been formed, although no one realized it at the time, over here in Ohio. And now Bill's back here in New York, and he's going to meet Hank and all the others, right? A second small group promptly took shape in New York, to be followed in 1937 by the start of a third in Cleveland, where we had some of our biggest growth. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered that dark world of the alcoholic. It was now time. What was the name? Trying to think. Oxford group had a different name for us at the time.
The Drunk Squad?
The Drunk Squad, that's right. We were called the Drunk Squad. Nobody had a name for us yet at the time, because we'd meet just like we would in churches now. We'd meet at the Oxford group. So it's now time that the struggling group thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. The determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 with this publication of this volume. The membership had reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous, from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase in its pioneering time. Anybody know what a fledgling is? It's kind of like that chick when they come out and they're like this, kind of like a newcomer. You know, the hair, feathers aren't laid back nice yet, stumbles around, kind of falls, you know, like it's flying blind, would fall into the glass window, right? So we're kind of, the word is pretty much, when used as an adjective, adolescent, immature. Our immature stage is over, but then he uses flying blind at the end, so now we're soaring, right? We've had some growth. Our flying blind period is over, and now we're beginning to have this success in our pioneering days. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Ausler, then editor of Liberty, the magazine Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. But that was put out in 1939. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. Then, in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. The Rockefellers were involved in us originally with the idea of trying to get the book out, too. We went and talked to them, okay? But also, they didn't believe in any drinking or smoking at all, so they were they liked that we had some growth and help here. Anyway, the news got out to the world inquiries. We were having this dinner. There's a bunch of our original members are going to be there, people from the press, people that are friends of the Rockefellers, right? And many people went to the bookstore to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. By March of 1941, the membership shot up to 2,000. Then Jack Alexander, right, wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post and placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. They flooded us. By the close of 1941, AA's numbered 8,000 members. The mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. That's pretty cool. Has anybody seen the article, the picture of the Saturday Evening Post with the girl on the front cover? You can see it down at Central Office, and there's a little picture of it in the books that I have here, right? Has anybody ever read any of the pamphlets we have for free in the meetings? Sometimes not. All right, so I'm walking by there once, and I saw this pamphlet. It's like, Jack Alexander. Well, who's he? How come he gets his own pamphlet? Right? That is, FYI, if you ever see it, that is the Jack Alexander article that you would find in the Saturday Evening Post. We actually have it as one of our pamphlets put out by Central Office. You can read it if you'd like. Another neat story is that the Liberty article, Sybil, who got sober out here, she was the first woman sober west of the Mississippi, originally in Los Angeles, picked up the Liberty article. I love this story. She picked up the Liberty article, right, and was going to steal it, but didn't want to get caught. So then she's like, there's a hospital for alcoholics, right? So that was 1939. By 1940, when the article came out in 41 for the Saturday Evening Post, that's when Sybil got sober, because she picked that up and she goes, oh, those are those people at the AA hospital, and she wrote to them, and she was told to go to a meeting here in Los Angeles. Long story, I'm going to condense it here. She shows up, and they thought her husband was the alcoholic, so they made her sit in the hallway, and she got all pissed off, so she went to the bar and got drunk. She decided to call up and say, you guys, I need your AA ambulance right now. Well, you're drunk. Well, of course I am. You threw me out of the meeting. Well, you're the alcoholic? Well, they didn't know. Please go back. Eventually, she goes back then the next week to her first meeting, or that Friday night to her first meeting in Los Angeles. At that time, there was a stack of letters. And they were going, Jack, you're down Orange County. You're going to go get all those men. These are all the people that wrote to New York and are looking for an answer. Alan, here's a stack for your area. And right? And is there a Sybil here? Well, I'm Sybil. Well, here's all the women that wrote to New York that want an answer and don't want to die. Go get them and bring them back to the meeting next week. I can't do that, she says. I have this on tape if anybody wants to get a copy of hers. It's a great story. He goes, why not? She goes, I'll be drunk. He goes, well, if you're drunk, these women might die. Go get them and bring them back to the meeting. So her second meeting, within her first week, right, of sobriety, she's keeping track of all these women and writing down their names and sponsoring all these girls that are coming to meetings. How neat is that? I'm telling you, you don't have to have 30 days or 30 years to be able to help another person. But she goes, what do I tell him? He goes, don't tell him anything. You don't know anything yet. Just bring him back to the meeting. Powerful, huh? A little bit of our history. So our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. Now we're beginning to walk. The test that it faced was this. Could these large number of erstwhile erratic or former erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Anybody try and put together something in a meeting and who's in charge and who gets what and right. Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Of course. Would there be strivings for power, prestige? What do you think we're getting at here, huh? Would there be schemes that would split AA apart? Schisms. Soon AA was beset or set beside with these problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AA had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. Back to Sybil, which I love her story because it just follows this so closely. Her brother Tex is written about in the book Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. He started the bottom of the line or below the ground meeting in Long Beach, one of the oldest meetings, right? He was tired of driving up to Los Angeles, so he's going to start his own meeting in Long Beach, and the guys up in Los Angeles went, you can't do that, we're copywriting AA in California. And he goes, we'll see how long that lasts. And soon, within 6 months, there were meetings everywhere. Orange County, everywhere. So yeah, our traditions were important. And I love how some of the little personal stories were some of the schemes that we copyrighted. You can't start your meeting, we're in charge. See how long that lasts. So we're going to talk about that. As we soon discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA group and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve, never govern, that each group is to be autonomous, and that there be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no dues or fees. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization. Good. Even in our service centers, our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversy. Does that word TV pop out and make you go, I saw a TV show that's on TV now where they say they're AA. They're characters. They're not people in the rooms going, hello, this is inside of a meeting. It's characters in a story. There's a difference. This was the substance of what? The AA 12 traditions, which are stated in full on page 561 of this small book. Though none of the principles had the force of rules or laws, they had become so widely accepted by 1950 that they were confirmed by our first international conference held in Cleveland. Today, the remarkable unity of AA is one of the greatest assets that our society has. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds, for there were two principal reasons. One, the large number of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25 sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and first decided they didn't want the program, but a great number of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passes. How many people here have heard 1 in 30 of you will survive, the rest of you will not make it? Those are not our statistics, especially when people held on to what we wrote in here to show you precisely how we've done it, right? And in AA, in Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, on page 261, it talks about our success rate in Cleveland was estimated at 93%. Okay? We had some high percentages then, just saying. But we were in the book. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the administration or people going, oh my God, did you see Bob sober? He's not drunk anymore, laying on, right? Friends in medicine, religion, and press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates or friends, supporters. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. Some of the recommendation of AA's early medical and religious friends will be found further on in this book. This is one of my pet peeves and one of my favorite parts of the book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as with the men of religion. As my sponsor would say, let the doctors do the doctor stuff. How tragic is it that a newcomer is in here and quiet, didn't even raise their hand and saying, I really want this, I really want this, I really want to be part of, I want, but I'm scared to introduce myself. And somebody in the meeting tells them, you can't come back here if you're on high blood pressure medicine, let's say. Or whatever. I'm not picking one in particular, but. So they go home, stop taking their medicine altogether, just so they can be part of us and have a heart attack and never make it back. Or something worse. We're not doctors, right? I have an answer out of this book. I can show you where the answers are in this book, what I learned when I went through this book, the precise instructions on how to get sober through our steps. It does not mean I got an MD at the end of my name, right? Another thing is we are not a religious organization, which we're going to read a little bit right here. When I was speaking at that one meeting and the girl was standing next to me really quiet and all she wanted was a book and to ask me a question. And I turned and I asked her, what is it? And she goes, I just want to know if I'm in the right place. And I said, well, what's the matter, honey? Of course, what can I help you with? I wanted to know her question. She goes, well, the lady just told me that if I keep coming to this meeting, I'll find Jesus. And we're Jewish. And I was wondering if there's someplace else I'm supposed to be. That's not what we do here, okay? It is not one particular religious thought or ideal. We are not a religious organization. Alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America in distant lands. The same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation, we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. More than 15% of us are women. This was 1955. At present, our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 25% a year. So far, upon a total problem of several million actually or potential alcoholics in the world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcoholic problem in all of its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly, yet it is our great hope that all those who have yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road of new freedom. And that is the second edition. The next two forewords that we're going to read are to the third and the fourth edition. The third edition, March of 1976. By March of 1976, in the third edition, when this went to the printer, a total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicated that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. Women now make up more than 1/4 of the membership. Among newer members, the proportions is nearly 1/3. 7% of the AAs surveyed are less than 30 years of age, among them many in their teens. This is 1976. Age of Aquarius? No. All right, so the basic principle of the AA program as it appears, hold good for the individual with many different lifestyles. Just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities, the 12 steps that summarize the program may be called Los Dos Pasos in one country. I do not speak French or Spanish, so Les Deux États in another. But they trace exactly the same path to recovery that was blazed by the earliest members of Alcoholics Anonymous. In spite of the great increase in size and span of this fellowship, it is at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks to another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. Fourth edition, 2001. This fourth edition of Alcoholics Anonymous, the one we're reading right now, came off the press in November of 2001, at the start of the new millennium. Since the third edition's publication in 1976, worldwide membership of AA has just about doubled to an estimated 2 million or more. I'm getting goosebumps. Anybody else? With nearly 100,800 groups meeting in approximately 150 countries around the world. Literature has played a major role in AA's growth and in striking phenomenon. In the past quarter century has been the explosion of translations of our basic literature into many languages and dialects. In country after country where AA's seed was planted, it has taken root, slowly at first, then growing by leaps and bounds. When literature has become available, currently Alcoholics Anonymous has been translated into 43 languages. As the message of recovery has reached a larger number of people, it has also touched the lives of vastly greater variety of suffering alcoholics. When the phrase, "we are people who normally would not mix," page 17 of this book, was written in 1939, it referred to a fellowship composed of largely men and a few women with quite similar social, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Like so much of AA's basic text, those words have proved to be far more visionary than the founding members could have ever imagined. The stories added to this edition represent a membership whose characteristics of age, gender, race, and culture have widened and have deepened to encompass virtually everyone the first 100 members could have hoped to reach. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in our society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practice within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technology, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world in a meeting anywhere. AAs share their experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and to help other alcoholics. Modem to modem, computer to computer, in other words, or face-to-face, AA speaks the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity.